As president, did you tell the story of race in America enough, do you think?
All the places I've been and all the things I've seen, all the people I've talked to, I carry with me. They're a part of what I do right here, holding the powerful accountable, keeping them honest.
AC 360, Tuesday through Saturday only on CNN.
I'm Blake Essig in Tokyo, and this is CNN.
Live from CNN London, this is Connect the World with Becky Anderson.
Well, this hour, from celebrations to cutthroat infighting, how the mood in Britain has dramatically changed overnight. I'm Becky Anderson. Hello and welcome back to Connect the World. Well, that is the sound of booing. The British Prime Minister booed during the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations, perhaps an ominous sign for Boris Johnson. After all, today he is trying to hang on to his job. In the coming hours, Mr Johnson will face a vote of confidence after 15% of UK lawmakers from his own Conservative Party said that they could no longer support him, not after the simmering scandal over lockdown parties and his response to Britain's cost of living crisis. The Prime Minister's fate in the hands of some 360 Tory lawmakers in Parliament. At least 54 members are not happy and chose to trigger this vote. And we are hearing that Boris Johnson has written to all Conservative lawmakers, essentially asking for their support. Downing Street says Boris Johnson plans to address the 1922 Committee of Conservatives this hour. CNN's Bianca Nobilo is standing by for us outside 10 Downing Street, which of course is the residence of the British Prime Minister. She joins us live from there. Boris Johnson will give it his best shot as he addresses members of his own party in the next hour, we are told. What chance he can survive this, Bianca?
In the immediate, the chances are high because at least 160, 170 of his own MPs are on the government payroll, so they're connected to the government in some respect, junior ministers, cabinet ministers, etc. So it would be a massive political upset for him to actually lose this vote. But still, if he wins, but he doesn't win decisively, then he will be mortally wounded as Prime Minister, and he'll be in post, but not really in power, drained of a lot of his authority. And a large part of this, Becky, is because the discontent is so broad in the party and so disparate. We have MPs that don't agree on anything within his party, agreeing on one thing, that they want a new leader. And even though some of the Prime Minister's allies are out in force today saying, well, he only needs one vote to win, strictly speaking, yes, but in reality, he needs more than that.
The precedent is set for this, of course. Theresa May, Boris Johnson's predecessor, went through a similar vote of confidence. She won, but her leadership was effectively hobbled for the rest of her time in office. One of the things that may work in his favour, of course, is the lack of obvious successors for the party to rally around. Let's just talk about who that successor might be should this vote go against him at this point.
Becky, you are absolutely right. That is something working in the Prime Minister's favour. And were this vote to be held a few months prior, it wouldn't be the same situation, because the Chancellor, who lives in that building to my right, Rishi Sunak, was tipped to be a future leader of the party. He was doing very well in internal party polls, he did well with the public, and he was a slick operator that a lot of people had high hopes for. But he was embroiled in scandals, Partygate, also his own tax affairs and those of his wife, which has really tarnished him as a political figure. So he's not really in the running at all. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is always keen to sort of indicate that she wants to throw her hat in the ring, quite keen for the comparisons people make between her and Margaret Thatcher. That's something that the Conservative Party really likes to hear as well. Another name that you're hearing people talk about today is Penny Mordaunt, who was the first female Secretary of State for Defence in the United Kingdom. Doesn't have a great relationship with Boris Johnson, hasn't spoken out in support of him today. Nadine Zahawi, who I believe you've spoken to many times, Becky, who was the vaccine minister during the pandemic. Very successful businessman, highly regarded within the party. He's also tipped as a possible contender. And then you have other dark horses too. The Defence Secretary, perhaps with a strong showing on Ukraine, Tom Tugendhat. You know, it's a very large selection of people to choose from, and there really is not a clear front-runner. And as I was just saying, Becky, because the discontent about Boris Johnson is so broad, there's really no consensus whatsoever around what kind of candidate the party would coalesce around if Boris Johnson isn't able to continue as leader.
To the point that we were making just earlier, and to your point that there are those who expect him to survive this vote, even if he does, it is going to be damaging, isn't it, to his political authority. This is what the leader of the opposition had to say earlier.
I think history tells us that this is the beginning of the end. If you look at the previous examples of no confidence votes, even when Conservative Prime Ministers survive those, and he might survive it tonight, the damage is already done.
The damage is already done, says the opposition leader. You might say, you know, he would say that, wouldn't he? Why, at the end of the day, do you believe we are where we are at?
It's easy to say Partygate because it's been the scandal that keeps on giving. That was significant in Boris Johnson's very colourful history of scandal in his career. This is a man that's been fired twice and has always courted scandal and controversy, is because those who supported Boris Johnson didn't think he was a saint. They kind of saw him as a bit of an anti-hero, but their anti-hero. So with Partygate, what that displayed was a disregard for the sacrifices that the public were making, hypocrisy, and a real visceral hurt that people felt. Apologies for the current helicopter going over my head. And that's what shifted things, is Boris Johnson was considered no longer to be their Prime Minister, but somebody who would do something and ignore the sacrifices that they were making. I think that's why it was so significant. And even broader than that, Becky, I speak to MPs from the Conservative Party, like just this morning, who are not lawmakers that you would consider to be idealistic. And even they are saying to me that now, this is a question of integrity and the loss of trust of the British public. Even recently, Boris Johnson changed the ministerial code in the UK to remove references to resignation if you break it, to remove all references to honesty, transparency and integrity. So there are MPs in his own party that are thinking, you know, I've bit my lip, I've not said anything for a long time now, but democracy and standards in public life are actually changing as a result of this premiership too.
Bianca, thank you. Bianca's outside number 10. Fly on the wall would be useful, wouldn't it, to know what was going on behind that black door. Thank you. My next guest is a former UK Conservative cabinet minister and vocal critic of Boris Johnson. He tweeted this, quote, "There was once another tradition in the Conservative Party that talked of prudence, dignity and restraint. Boris Johnson shames the party and our country. He cannot govern. Let him go." Rory Stewart joins us now live, and I think that quote makes your position quite clear, sir. But let's just be as clear as we can be. Why, to your mind, does Boris Johnson have to leave office and leave office now?
Well, fundamentally, because he lies so much, and he lies in the House of Commons. He lies about very important issues, and democracy, in the end, has to depend on a certain amount of truth. Voters, when they're voting, have to have some sense of what the Prime Minister is going to do or not do. And if you lose trust completely in the integrity of your leader, it doesn't really matter actually whether you're working for a business or a charity or a government. Things become impossible. It becomes impossible for him to govern, impossible for him to inspire people, impossible really for him to get anything done.
First one. I just want you to have a listen to what one MP, a supporter of Boris Johnson, had to say to me just last hour. Have a listen.
I agree with what the Prime Minister said when he apologised in a recent statement to the House of Commons and through the House of Commons to the British people some 42 times for failures within the operation in Downing Street, and he's made significant changes to his operation in Number 10. He's appointed new personnel to tighten up the discipline. We accept there were failures through the lockdown period, but there's been no attempt to shy away from that. But what we're talking about today is who is the right person to lead our country, to lead our party, and to take us into the next general election in 2 or so years' time. And I still believe that person is Boris Johnson.
And Rory, he went on to say, I'm saying the Prime Minister deserves the opportunity to carry on and explain to the British people what we are doing to improve their lives and laws. Your response?
Well, I think the first thing is that one of the things that Boris Johnson gets away with is always by making you focus on the latest lie. So he will often say, try to trivialise it by saying, well, it was just a cake. or it was just a scandal about my wallpaper. What in fact is going on, of course, is there is a pattern of lying which goes all the way back to him proroguing Parliament, changing the ministerial code, trying to take on Parliament about lobbying. There have been many, many examples, and what the public is sensing now is that this scandal over him lying about his attendance at a party during COVID at Downing Street is just one more example of a man who actually has been caught lying again and again throughout his life, and the public's had enough. And I think the other thing to say to my colleague there is that sadly nobody has any confidence in Boris Johnson's ability to deliver. The economic situation in the country is not good. The situation around Northern Ireland is a mess. And it's very difficult to believe that Boris Johnson has the ideas or the credibility or the support to keep going. He's on track at the moment, despite it's amazing. I mean, he won one of the largest majorities in recent history, and he's on track to be one of the shortest serving prime ministers ever. The fact that he's managed within about 2 years to alienate the public and his MPs so much that they're about to topple somebody with this very large majority tells you almost all you need to know.
I think one of the most scathing attacks on Mr Johnson comes from an MP who has supported him for years, Jesse Norman, who you will know very well. I'll read out just some of the letter that he wrote to the Prime Minister. He wrote that the Tories cannot, quote, afford to squander the next 2 years, adrift and distracted by endless debate about Johnson's leadership. I just wonder, I mean, you know, when you speak to those in the party, is it your sense that others now in the majority feel the same way?
It's very difficult to tell. I mean, essentially, Boris Johnson is trying to recreate the party. It's a sort of British version of what Donald Trump did with the Republican Party in the United States. He's created a very new coalition. He's found new voters in ex-industrial zones in Northern England. He's gone for a much more populist approach. And so he's become a very polarizing figure. And the problem within the party is that it's now a very strange coalition between what used to be called One Nation conservatives, who are more centrist, and most of them are appalled by Boris Johnson and are desperate for him to go. But there is still a strong support group, particularly amongst people who are hardcore supporters of Brexit, who feel that this is all some kind of liberal elite conspiracy against him and want him to stay. But as you say, Jesse Norman's criticisms there in that letter are particularly devastating, because what he explains is it's not just about the lies, it's about the basic competence, that this isn't a man who's going to be able to sort out Britain's energy policy, be able to sort out cost of living, work out how to level up, how to work out how we're going to deal with serious deprivation in Northern England. He can't do any of those things because his own MPs, his own ministers, his own civil service no longer believe in him. And all he's doing day to day is trying to stay alive.
Rory Stewart, you suggest that there are those who'll say in the Conservative Party it's the sort of liberal elite, the sort of, you know, inside the kind of London Beltway who are efforting to get rid of him because they hate, frankly, the Brexit. I mean, they hate the idea that they're no longer part of the European Union. How much does that resonate? At the end of the day, I mean, is it booze and cake that got him if he goes? Or is it wider than that? And do you genuinely believe that there is, you know, a movement within the Conservative Party to actually look back to Europe and say, we want back in?
I don't think there's a strong movement in the Conservative Party to get back into Europe. I think there is a strong movement in the Conservative Party to think about how outside the European Union you could have a much closer relationship to Europe, which is more respectful, which deals with the problems of the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic and the challenges between Northern Ireland and Great Britain at the moment. In other words, a closer relationship politically and economically. But the fundamental split isn't really about Europe anymore. It's, I'm afraid, a sort of culture war. It's that Boris Johnson represents a type of populist politics that we're not used to in Britain. Right from the moment that he came in, when he tried to shut the doors on Parliament, when he lied to the Queen, more recently when he's tried to overturn the ministerial code. And of course, when he lies at the dispatch box, he is not living out the kind of values which Britain used to pride itself on. And we had many things that made us very angry with politicians. Of course, people often think politicians are dishonest and ambitious, but Boris Johnson has taken it to a level that nobody's seen before, and I think people are profoundly shocked.
Has Boris Johnson wasted this period of strong Conservative support amongst the British public?
Yes, totally. It's extraordinary. He came in with a majority of 80, which is extraordinary. I mean, it would mean that in a normal government, he'd be unable to lose a vote. And he could have used it as an opportunity to really do the kinds of things that people wanted to do. In particular, work out how you rebuild the economy after Brexit, how you level up, how you get more equal conditions between London and the north of England. But if you take just one example, one of the great things that's holding Northern England back is there's no train connections connecting the great cities of Leeds and Manchester. And he's apparently effectively abolished that program. He's not going ahead with it. He's not managed to get the nuclear power stations built that he's been talking about. He's really not managed to do anything. It's very unclear to anybody what his policies actually are. He talks about getting Brexit done, but it's obvious there are still big problems around Brexit. And apart from that, we don't really know what he's going to do over the next 2 years. And I think in the end, he can't survive because nobody knows what the point of him is anymore.
Well, he may survive this vote, of course. Many people, many experts here suggesting that it's likely that he will, but suggesting he will be a spent force, effectively, going forward. What does happen next? To your mind, I mean, you were imbued in British politics for a long time. I'm not sure whether you're, sort of delighting in the fact that you're not part of the British political establishment anymore. But, what needs to happen next, to your mind?
Well, the first thing is you're probably right. He can rely on government ministers and on people who he's promised jobs to probably get him a majority in this vote tonight. But if significant numbers of people, let's say 100 MPs, come out against him, he is fatally wounded. No prime minister has survived that kind of vote against them. They all go pretty soon after that. And the big change that we need, I'm afraid, is a change that has to happen both within the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party has to stand up for its values again. It needs to demonstrate that it believes in integrity, it believes in honesty, and that it's going to conduct itself to the highest standards. But I'm afraid we also need to look at ourselves as voters and work out what on earth got into us to vote for Boris Johnson. It's true that 2 years in, people are now deeply regretting it. He has some of the worst net approval ratings that any British Prime Minister has seen. But it's taken a surprisingly long time for us to wake up to the fact that the man is, I'm afraid, somebody who's been known all his life as somebody who's a liar, who finds it very difficult to pay any attention to detail, who's extremely bad at running things and is extremely unreliable. And it still beggars belief that we had him as our Prime Minister in the first place.
Rory Stewart's no longer involved in the world of daily British politics. It's good to have you on, sir. Your analysis and insight is important. We thank you for joining us today from Amman in Jordan. Thank you. Well, the confidence vote was triggered by the 1922 committee, a group comprised of all the Conservative members of Parliament who don't hold a cabinet position. At least 54 sitting Conservative MPs, as they are known, have written to the chairman asking for this vote of no confidence, reaching what is a 15% threshold, which then sets the process in motion. Prime Minister Johnson will lose if at least half of Conservative MPs plus one extra vote against him. That's 180 members of Parliament. If that happens, the Conservative Party would stay in power and select a new leader who would then become Prime Minister. Mr Johnson could either stay on until his successor is decided, or an interim leader could be appointed. If Mr Johnson wins, he stays as leader, and the 1922 committee would be unable to launch a further challenge to him for another year. And you can read a lot more on the looming confidence vote on our website, including more on the process the UK follows for electing a new leader of the party, and a review of what our analyst calls the darkest moment of Boris Johnson's premiership. That is CNN.com on your computer or via the CNN app on your smartphone. Well, you're watching Connect the World with me, Becky Anderson, live from London today. Still ahead. The battle for Severodonetsk takes another turn. What Ukrainian officials are saying today after reporting notable progress over the weekend. And gun violence in the United States claims more lives as calls for gun reform grow ever louder.
Out front tonight, a potential breakthrough in treating coronavirus.
We've gotten very little help from the federal government.
Could all this spending lead to a bigger economic crisis? One of our viewers saw you last night on the show. She says she's going to pay your rent this month. Shut up. I want to go now to an incredible story of survival. Would you do it all again in terms of being a nurse, knowing that that could put you at risk for this?
I want to help people more than I ever have.
Aaron Burnett out front on CNN.
It's 9 o'clock in the morning at the University of Dayton.
How is everyone? What we're going to do this morning.
Tony Talbot is teaching a class about slavery.
There's over 40 million human trafficking victims in the world today.
But his students aren't just learning the facts about human trafficking. They're being trained to teach others about it, students who are even younger than they are.
We get the students to become near peer educators, going into classrooms, giving human trafficking awareness presentations. If we tell children about this now, they can become part of the solution.
Hi guys, my name is Ami. I'm a second-year student at the University of Dayton.
Today, Talbot students are taking over Nick Pent's 9th grade American history class at the Dayton Regional STEM School.
It's definitely important to know what is trafficking, because maybe you're in that situation and you don't even know that you're being trafficked.
A lot more online trafficking is happening, and I didn't really realize that before, but now that we do, you can obviously use more precautions when you're online.
I'm hoping that my students, now that they're knowledgeable, hopefully they get a little bit passionate about it, become leaders. I'm telling you, you just gotta step aside and let the next generation do its thing.
Thank you.
Well, a worsening situation around Severodonetsk. That is the assessment today from the Ukrainian military chief in Luhansk after a weekend in which Ukraine claimed its military had retaken half the city from Russia. These pictures of Severodonetsk coming from Ukraine's government. Now, that and its sister city, Lysychansk, are the main focus of Russia's offensive to take total control of that region of the Donbass. The military chief says Russia is mainly targeting Lysychansk, which sits on the strategic high ground across the river from Severodonetsk. Ukraine's president visited there Sunday during a tour of cities along the front lines. Vladimir Zelensky praising his military and the millions of Ukrainians who have been displaced during this nearly 3.5-month-long war. Ben Wiedemann on the ground for us in eastern Ukraine. And a message of support clearly there from the Ukrainian president as he travelled so close to what is the front line in this war. What's your assessment of what is going on the ground at this point, Ben?
Well, it's clearly a very bitter and intense battle to take control of Severodonetsk. As you mentioned earlier last week, the Ukrainians were conceding that the Russians controlled about 80% of the city. Then over the weekend, the Ukrainians said that they'd taken ground in the city, and now it appears that they're losing ground again. The Ukrainians say the Russians are sparing none of their men or none of their equipment in this battle, which seems to be street to street fighting, the intensity of which we haven't necessarily seen very often in this war, which is largely a war of artillery. But the Russians are using this artillery to its maximum advantage. They, as you mentioned, Lysychansk overlooks Severodonetsk, and I've been there many times while it was under bombardment as well. And really, that is a key position that the Ukrainians clearly do not want to lose. But of course, the problem is they are facing Russia, which has got far more artillery pieces than Ukraine does, and just uses them around the clock intensely. Now, the Ukrainians are hoping to get long-range artillery missile systems from the British and the Americans, who have said they're going to provide them with this equipment, which would allow them to target the Russian artillery but be out of range of that artillery, the Russian artillery itself. The problem is it takes time. It takes time to pack that equipment up, train the Ukrainians to use it, and get it to the front lines. And what we've seen is that President Putin has made it clear he intends to try to disrupt the supply of Western weapons to Ukraine. Becky?
Ben Wiedemann on the ground. Thank you, Ben. Well, from the war in Ukraine to the battle against gun violence in the United States, and sadly it got worse over the weekend in Philadelphia. Police say multiple shooters opened fire in a bustling entertainment district on Saturday night. 3 people there were killed. The city's mayor says he is fed up with the bloodshed and is calling for tougher gun laws. Just one of several mass shootings in the US in recent days. My colleague Paulo Sandoval has more.
This is the scene following another mass shooting in the United States, this time in Philadelphia. Police said several active shooters fired into a crowd Saturday night, killing at least 3 people and injuring 11 others.
We're absolutely devastated by this incident. And we mourn the lives lost and the dozens and dozens of lives affected by this tragedy.
Philadelphia police said a physical altercation led to the shooting. They said one gunman was likely shot and wounded but escaped police, and another suspected gunman likely among the 3 people killed. In all, police said at least 5 guns were likely used by multiple shooters.
It's unacceptable. It's beyond unacceptable.
There's been at least 9 mass shootings since Friday across 8 states, leaving at least 12 people dead and dozens more injured.
I'm tired of standing in front of you talking about guns and bodies.
Sunday morning in Chattanooga, Tennessee, 3 people were killed and at least 14 others injured near a downtown nightclub. Police said some of the victims were hit by bullets, while others by fleeing cars.
There are families whose lives have been shattered forever because once again we had people deciding to resolve their issues with firearms.
Another shooting at a bar, this one in Mesa, Arizona. 2 people dead, 2 more injured. Also in Arizona, a strip mall shooting early Saturday in Phoenix. 1 person was killed, 8 others hurt.
I heard over 100 gunshots going off. A group of people that just started running like every different direction.
Phoenix police said the person killed is a 14-year-old girl. More children hurt, this time in Somerton, South Carolina. Police said a drive-by shooting at a graduation party left 1 woman dead and 7 others injured, including 5 minors ages 12 to 17 years old. And the mass shootings didn't stop there. Another 5 hurt in Socorro, Texas. 1 killed, 3 hurt in Omaha, Nebraska, and 1 person killed and 5 hurt in Chesterfield, Virginia.
I was almost asleep and heard numerous gunshots, 20 to 40, woke me up instantly. My fiance run down the steps yelling, get up, gunshots, gunshots.
Well, that was CNN's Paulo Sandoval reporting. If you'd like to support victims of mass shootings, including the Texas school shooting, you can get more information at cnn.com/impact. You'll find several ways there that you can help. Well, ahead on the show, a tit-for-tat response from the US and South Korea after Pyongyang's latest missile launch. We'll have more on Seoul's recent change in tone.
Afghan women are afraid that this is the beginning of your efforts to erase them from the workspace.
It's not clear. Even if we appear with the burqa, maybe they will say that women's voices are forbidden.
Did you ever imagine that you would be prevented from going to school?
Girls' education is fundamental to the dignity of Afghan life.
Do you believe that young girls will be allowed to go to school here in Afghanistan?
I think that there's an understanding that wellness and fitness and well-being is important in a COVID world. And that is certainly what we're seeing. Not only are we seeing a significant demand for membership across our estate, but we're also seeing an increase in usage, existing members using the clubs more. And that on top of hybrid working. You know, we've got lots of data that tell us that members are going to not go into the office as much. We're a suburban-based business. We're seeing people come and use the clubs differently. And that is all positive for us. So on the negative side, we've got an increase in the cost base. But on the positive side, we've got a greater demand for what we're offering. I think someone has to be absolutely committed to improving their mental and physical well-being. But we will hold their hand every step of the way.
I'm Max Foster in London, and this is CNN.
A reminder of our top story. You're watching Connect the World with me, Becky Anderson. This hour, Boris Johnson is expected to address the committee that will oversee a challenge to his leadership. The British Prime Minister faces a vote of confidence set to happen in less than 90 minutes, triggered by disgruntled members of his own Conservative Party. If more than half vote to oust him, he'll be forced to step down as party leader and will be removed from office. Mr Johnson has reportedly sent a letter to Conservative MPs asking for their support and promising they can, quote, repay the trust of the 14 million people who voted for us. He's alluding to the Conservative election victory back in December of 2019. Well, all of this, of course, comes amid backlash for parties held at Downing Street during the COVID lockdowns and amid growing concern about Johnson's handling of what is the cost of living crisis. In other news, South Korea and the United States taking a tougher tit-for-tat tone, with North Korea launching 8 surface-to-surface missiles after Pyongyang launched 8 ballistic missiles on Saturday. Now, all of the missiles were fired towards the sea, but this is the 3rd time South Korea has responded this way since President Yoon took office, and it comes as the International Atomic Energy Agency warns North Korea may be preparing for a nuclear test. Paula Hancock joins me live from Seoul. Paula.
Well, Becky, we certainly are seeing a stern and firm response from the South Korean president. That's what he said on Monday when he had a Memorial Day speech, saying that he was going to be tougher on North Korea. Now, we have seen these kind of responses, joint responses from the US and South Korea in the past, even with the previous South Korean President Moon Jae-in, although then he did move towards more of an engagement policy with North Korea. But what we saw on Sunday morning, which was interesting about the North Korean missile launches, not only the large number, but Japan's defense minister said that it was unprecedented. The fact that there were 8 short-range ballistic missiles fired, according to the South Koreans, from 4 separate locations around the country, all within about 40 minutes of each other. So that was responded to today, Monday, by the US and South Korea. It's worth pointing out both sides actually fired these missiles off the coast, off the east coast of the Korean peninsula into the water. But it really does show that this is somewhat of a tit for tat at this point. And as you mentioned, Becky, interesting as well that today is the day we hear from the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, saying that they believe that they have indications that one of the entrances to the underground tunnels where the previous 6 underground nuclear tests have happened from North Korea, they believe that has been reopened, and they say it could be possible preparation for a nuclear test. Something very similar to what we've heard from the US and South Korean intelligence agencies and military, saying that they believe the preparations are ready, that they are ready to have this 7th underground test, which experts say would suggest it's really now a political decision. So Kim Jong-un has to decide when or if he carries out that test. The IAEA, though, said that it would be a cause for serious concern. Becky?
Paula Hancock is in Seoul for you folks. Paula, thank you. Well, the topsy-turvy Twitter ownership saga has yet again been turned upside down. The world's richest man and prospective owner, Elon Musk, has threatened to walk away from a deal to buy the social media company. In a letter to Twitter's chief legal officer, Musk has demanded that the company turn over information proving its claims that fake accounts only make up 5% of the company. Well, the true number of genuine users on the platform has been a point of contention in getting the $44 billion sale over the finishing line. CNN technology reporter Brian Fung joins me now from Washington. This is an issue with what are known as bots. Can you tell us why it is that Elon Musk is so fixated on this?
Well, Becky, in a word, Musk believes that they are a nuisance. If he has an enormous amount of visibility on the platform, on Twitter, and when you have that big of a megaphone, you're going to inevitably get scammers and bots trying to capitalize off of that attention. And so often, in his replies beneath his tweets, you'll find fake accounts sometimes impersonating Musk or pitching scams to his followers in hopes of trying to pick up the unsuspecting or the folks who are not really paying attention. And so, for Musk, he's described this as Twitter's biggest problem and the biggest challenge that it faces. When he announced the deal, he said, we would fight the Twitter bots or die trying, so to speak. And so now, he's really questioning, what the size and scale of the scope of the problem is. And it's interesting because, he has initially made the bot problem out to be something that he could fix, and now he's saying that it's something that he, might not be able to fix at all.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I guess you could argue that he has every right to find out what's going on at the company that he wants to buy. There will be those who suggest this is a way for him to potentially wriggle out of the deal, right? This letter reported to the SEC, obviously, Musk stepping up his rhetoric and his actions. Let's have a look at the price, the Twitter share price as we speak. I mean, look, down nearly over 3% there, and down below the price at which he had agreed to buy this company. So is it clear what his goal is here?
Well, according to many Wall Street analysts, it seems that Musk's goal is to, pay a lower price for Twitter, as you can see kind of reflected in the stock value that you highlighted. But again, what we're looking at here in this letter is perhaps the clearest indication yet that Musk may be interested in pulling out of the deal entirely. And he's said as much when he said that Twitter is in breach of the merger agreement, and that Musk has, every intention of enforcing all of his rights that are contained in the agreement, and that includes potentially walking away from the deal. Now, it may not be that Musk could be that Musk faces an uphill battle in actually successfully pulling out, if that is his intention, given that he did waive his due diligence clause in striking the agreement, but we're going to have to see how well he's able to leverage this to his advantage.
Well, certainly those who are interested in the stock are voicing their disapproval today. That stock, as I say, down more than 3%. Always good to have you. Thank you, sir. Ahead on this show, US President Biden considers a visit to Saudi Arabia, a country he once labelled a pariah. More on why he needs the Saudis' help with our Stephen Collinson. Also ahead, pain at the pump. Is there any relief in sight for US consumers? Two stories, of course, coming up that have a link. That after this.
Islamic art, particularly geometry, is utterly fascinating to me. It's so old, but yet so complex. I grew up in Abu Dhabi. From an inspirational perspective, the Grand Mosque is just this marvelous, serene space. They use a lot of the floral motifs, and it's influenced my work. The type of art I make is predominantly made with paper and very fine layers of wood. So it's the structures, the patterns, the level of detail. When you repeat and you create symmetry, it becomes really beautiful. It's always about like this journey of discovery of like, well, what could I do with that and what's possible?
Tonight, fresh off his extraordinary record-extending French Open victory, the King of Clay, Rafael Nadal, sits down with Amanpour for a wide-ranging interview. Amanpour, tonight on CNN.
The world's biggest business stories. From every corner of the globe. Marketplace Africa, Asia, Europe, and Middle East.
American consumers must hope that the increase in oil supply announced by OPEC last week will soon put a dent in high gasoline prices in the United States, and relief cannot come soon enough. Gas prices, as they're known in the States, have rocketed by 25 cents in the past week alone. The national average jumped to nearly $5 a gallon, but in some states the price of gas or petrol at the pump is a lot higher. Matt Egan joins us live from a gas station in New York City. Look, this is not a peculiarly US issue, but it's an issue which is so prescient in the United States and so important to lawmakers as they go into the midterms this year. I guess this begs the question, why do prices keep going up even though OPEC announced late last week that it will pump more? Matt?
Well, Becky, I think the market is signaling that it's just not enough, that OPEC's move to ramp up production is too little, too late. And there is this concern that the shortage of oil, caused in part by the war in Ukraine, might be too big even for OPEC to solve. And so we've seen oil prices stay very high. U.S. oil, WTI, touching a 3-month high this morning before cooling off a bit. This is going to keep pressure on gasoline prices, petrol prices around the world, including here in Manhattan, where a gallon of gas is fetching about $6 right now. The national average at $4.87 in the United States. That's up 25 cents in the past week, almost 60 cents in the past month. And there are now 10 states around the country that are paying $5 or more on average. The latest two coming in the Midwest, Indiana and Michigan. And unfortunately, this is probably going to continue. And it's going to keep frustrating people. I mean, I spoke to an Uber driver here today who said that his energy, his fuel costs are going up by $100 higher per week than they were just a few months ago. I talked to an EMT who said that he's very frustrated, but there's really not much that he can do about it because he's got to get to work. And Becky, we could see prices go higher. The national average is expected to potentially hit $5.05 a gallon in the next 10 days. That's according to veteran oil analyst Andy Lipow.
Yeah, and, while this is extremely painful for the average consumer, and we're going into the summer driving season in the US, what is absolutely clear is that this is a very difficult situation for lawmakers in the States who may be headed back to the polls in November, which is why ultimately the US president has a real job to do, doesn't he, for those Democrat lawmakers. Is he likely to be successful at this point?
I think that the White House has clearly been laser focused on this issue for months. The president hasn't released more emergency oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve than anyone ever has before, so much so that the SPR is actually sitting at its lowest level since 1984, and yet prices are higher today than they were when the president announced these steps in late March, and I think that speaks to the size of the issue. It's just too much for the federal government to solve. There's really no easy answers here. They can't really do much about demand, which is very strong. If they tried to address a demand, that would have negative economic repercussions. So there's not much that he can do, but you're right, this is absolutely a negative for the Democrats heading into the polls this fall.
We're just looking at the prices on Brent crude and WTI. They're slightly lower today, but that is from a high level. They pushed higher at the back end of last week. Matt, it's a pleasure having you on. Thank you. So what options does Joe Biden have then to alleviate the strain at the pump? Well, there is one that he's been working towards, and that's getting Saudi Arabia, the effective leader of OPEC Plus, to increase oil production. For months, Riyadh had refused US requests. But last week, as we reported, the oil cartel did announce that it would increase supply through the summer months, but not by much. And although it is not by much, Washington still praised the Saudis for their role in that decision. That, along with the extension of a UN-brokered truce in Yemen, which is paving the way for a potential trip for Joe Biden to Saudi Arabia, possibly in July. Joe Biden and Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman would meet face-to-face, as we understand it, marking the first time Mr. Biden engages with the de facto Saudi ruler since taking office. It comes as a shock to many because, well, remember this.
We were not going to, in fact, sell more weapons to them. We were going to, in fact, make them pay the price and make them, in fact, the pariah that they are.
It was November 2019. Tough words, not all that long ago. That promise became a defining aspect of the president's foreign policy that set him apart from his predecessor. But now it appears that the winds are shifting. CNN Politics senior reporter Stephen Collinson writes of this trip, this pending trip, as we understand it, quote, basing foreign policy on morality always leads to charges of hypocrisy. The cold, hard political truth is that America's perceived interests and its principles often clash. Stephen Collinson joins me now live from Washington, D.C., and you probably had Jimmy Carter 1977 in your mind as you wrote that piece today. This is a trip, as we understand it, to be in the works at present, possibly for July. I guess what we should talk about is how important this trip is to Washington, and on the flip side of that, how important it is to Riyadh. Let's start in Washington.
Yes, Becky. Well, clearly, as you were just talking about with Matt, the president needs Saudi Arabia's help. The spike in gas prices in the United States is a political disaster for the president personally and for Democrats running into the midterm elections. The U.S. relationship with Saudi Arabia has for decades been marked by this clash between America's perceived interests and its concerns about repression and the political system there and the wider Saudi influence as it relates to extremist Islam, and the Saudi Arabia's key position economically and strategically to the United States, largely because of its massive oil reserves. And that you saw President Biden there. When he made those comments, he was on the campaign trail. He was trying to differentiate himself between President Donald Trump, who basically just brushed the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post columnist, in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul under the carpet by saying, well, Saudi Arabia is very important because it's against Iran and it buys loads of US weapons. So that's the context here. That's why he's getting a backlash. It's a classic clash between US political interests in Washington and the larger sort of strategic issue here. That's how this is unfolding. But I think, it's inevitable that the United States and Saudi Arabia, as they have many times before, will have to get over a period of very difficult relations for political needs in both countries.
The cold, hard political truth is that America's perceived interests and its principles often clash, you said. To Riyadh, who have been telegraphing for some time now, a break in the relationship or a worsening in the relationship between Washington and the Kingdom. There is an awful lot of leverage at this point, isn't there? And this is a trip, should it happen in July, which quite frankly is perfectly timed for Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman.
Right, and it would mark in many ways, at least from the position of people in the United States, as a re-entry from Mohammed bin Salman into the community of nations. If he receives an American president with all the pomp of a Saudi visit, that is going to be very uncomfortable for the White House. There's been a lot of backlash in the United States, for example, from Saudi dissidents, from the family of Jamal Khashoggi, from 9/11 families, so it could be quite a distasteful moment, if you like, for the president. That's why the White House appears to be billing this as part of a wider Middle East trip. He's also expected to go to Israel. The president could then talk about how, you know, it's important for the American president to talk to all sides in the Middle East to try and push forward peace efforts, and it would be less obviously a political mission to try and get the Saudis to, you know, pump more oil. But the White House has repeatedly tried to get OPEC to up production during this oil spike crisis, and it has failed. So they are driving a very hard bargain. I think what is very interesting is that this shows how the war in Ukraine has reshaped the international geopolitical picture. In many ways, the US position, Biden's position on Saudi Arabia was driven from a moral perspective that if you know, an American-based journalist is killed in the Saudi consulate, that is beyond the pale for relations between the two sides. He's taken the same kind of stance towards the war in Ukraine, saying that it's vital for US values, and this is one place where US values clash, and he's having to make a choice.
Fascinating. Stephen, thank you. If you'd like to read Stephen's analysis on a variety of stories, do subscribe to his newsletter, Meanwhile in America. While you're at it, subscribe to Meanwhile in the Middle East, launched about a month or so ago. It is a jolly good read. Taking a very short break. Back after this.
Almost all carbon emissions come from industries that shape our world. But at Standard Chartered, we believe progress doesn't have to cost our planet. That's why we're mobilizing $300 billion to help our clients change the way they operate, accelerating the transition to a net zero world. Because where others see problems, we see potential. We're Standard Chartered, and we're here for good.
Welcome back. You're watching Connect the World with me, Becky Anderson. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson seems to like number 10. He is fighting hard to hang on to it in the coming hours. He'll face a vote of confidence triggered by lawmakers in his own Conservative Party. And we are hearing that Mr Johnson has written to all Tory lawmakers, that's short for Conservative lawmakers, asking for their support. And Downing Street says he's been addressing the 1922 Committee of Conservatives this hour. Number 10, of course, being the home of the Prime Minister. Well, this all follows the Platinum Jubilee, where Boris Johnson and his wife Carrie were booed. There were only cheers for Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. Well wishes travelled from all over the UK and the world to central London for Sunday's pageant marking the finale of the big event. CNN's Anna Stewart joined some of the revellers in London. Take a look.
The Great British Street Party is a long-standing tradition for marking royal events. Coronations, royal weddings